All right, it looks like we've hit 11 o'clock and we've got quite a few people here. So we're going to kick off, and I'll just remind everybody, a little bit of housekeeping, this is being recorded, and also can you please mute your microphone? Excellent. So welcome everybody to today's Thought Leadership webinar. The topic today is exploring innovative solutions to our housing crisis. I also invite you today to think about your questions for the Q&A at the end, and I encourage you to ask them because likely others are thinking it. And for these conversations, we've been finding that it really works to just invite you to welcome diverse perspectives. As we move away from sort of being right or wrong and binary absolute truths, we can have a more nuanced, sophisticated idea landscape to move us all forward on these challenging topics together. My name is Frida Wells and I work for the Wellington Regional Leadership Committee Secretariat. And quickly introduce today's speakers, and we'll get right into their presentations because an hour goes fast. So we have speaking first Sam Stubbs. He's the co-founder and managing director of Simplicity New Zealand, and Dave Loveridge, managing director of Watson Group. So Sam is the co-founder and managing director of Simplicity, a non-profit KiwiSaver and fund manager that gives 15% of all fees to charity and invests with a conscience. Sam was previously CEO of Tower Investments. He was managing director, MD of Hanover Group, and worked for Goldman Sachs in London and Hong Kong. He's also worked for NatWest Markets, Bay Richwhite, and IBM. So here he is back in little old New Zealand, and I look forward to hearing these big ideas. And David Loveridge, he is the managing director of Watson Group, a family business focused on mixed-use development and investment. David is passionate about creating spaces for humans to live. David will discuss the thesis of a white paper he's working on, that affordable housing is urban infrastructure. So without further ado, I would like to welcome and hand over to Sam. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Frida. Well, welcome, folks. And greetings from in our offices. We have all secondhand and repurposed stuff. This is our art room. These are pictures that used to hang in the walls of DB pubs all around the country. They're actually black and white photographs which were coloured in by hand by some working mums who worked on Queen Street and coloured them in with pastels. And there are thousands of them around, and and they're all New Zealand. So anyway, welcome. I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes. I have about 18 slides here, and this is actually part of a pitch deck we have for a new product that we've launched. I won't be talking about the product. That's not the purpose of this meeting, but an awful lot of the background is appropriate to what we're doing. It's working. Cool. Let me just get this. Here we go. All right. So basically, Simplicity, I'll take you through who we are and what our approach is towards helping out with the housing crisis that we have in this country. And there are various different ways that we do it. And I'll run you through just a very high-level overview, and then we can go to questions later on. So first of all, I just wanted to talk about who we are, because to understand what we're doing, you need to understand what our motivations are. We were started 7 years ago and very much modelled on Southern Cross, which means that we wanted to set up a non-profit large-scale financial services business, which really was acting in the interest of New Zealanders, making members money. And so our foundation owns us, and we run as a non-profit company, and we're involved in KiwiSaver funds. We're a default provider now, and we also do investment funds. And interesting enough, you'll see also we do first home mortgages as well. And if you think about this as a business, basically we fundamentally call ourselves a dignity business. And what that means is we want people to have dignity in retirement, but also dignity in life. And how people can have dignity in their life is to have choices. A life with choices is a life with dignity. The other way of saying that is that poverty really sucks. And poverty means you don't have choices. So what do you do in order to give people choices? You make them richer. So basically, money gives you choices in life, and choices gives you dignity. So while we run as a non-profit owned by a charity, we are highly focused on making our members the most amount of money, because that's what leads to a dignified life. So you sort of say, and just to give you an idea, we started out 7 years ago around my kitchen table. We now have, these numbers are about a week old, so they're even bigger now. We have about 147,500 members. We manage about almost $5.5 billion worth of funds under management. And when you have billions of dollars to manage, you can do things, and we'll show you what we're doing. We give a lot of money to charity. It's just ticked over $7 million this month, about $6,000 a day. And because we're a non-profit, we charge the lowest fees. Or extremely low fees, I should say. So, and that's, for someone with $50,000 saved, it's about $400 a year in fee savings in a growth fund. So, but we wanted to think about the housing problem here, and this was really triggered by my daughter coming to me one day and saying, "Dad, two of my teachers are living in garages, and we're in a decile 10 state school, decile 10 area." And then also, I kept on running against this unaffordable housing market in New Zealand. And if you have a look at this chart, which comes from Bernard Hickey, shows that in 2020, New Zealand was the least affordable housing market in the world. What that means is that 25% of our population was spending more than 40% of their disposable income on the mortgage or rent. And so we just had a crazy situation in New Zealand where we have so much land, so few people, so many resources, and yet housing is so expensive. It's just kind of crazy. And so we started turning our attention to how could we make a difference, given that one of the things about being a non-profit is we're going to be around for 100 years. We're never going to make any money, so we'll never have a profit, which means we'll never be bought or sold. So we're intended to be around here forever. So how could we use the fact that we had lots of money over a very large period of time to help make a difference in the housing market? And we wanted to look at the root cause of the problem here. And the problem, we think about this thing in terms of numbers and as economists. And the root cause of the problem we discovered was, and I think Sense partner Shamabel Jacob did this very useful chart. And I think this is the root cause of the problem with housing in New Zealand, which was that up until about the late 1970s, we used to build enough houses for our population. Houses were affordable. We had two dips there in the Great Depression and in World War II. But apart from that, then this is the number of dwelling consents per 1,000 of population. So it takes into account the fact that our population has grown. But then in the late 1970s and early 80s, suddenly house building fell off a cliff. And since then, we have been under-consenting and under-building houses relative to our population. And it's exacerbated even more. Not only are we building less, but the need for more houses per population grows because you get far more split families, you get people living longer, all of those sorts of things. So just as there was an increase in demand, we cut off supply. And the reason for that lack of supply is basically the state. Successive governments, and don't have a political leaning here, successive governments have explicitly or inexplicitly worked out that having high immigration and low housing supply means house prices go up. And when back in the late 70s and 80s, when 85% of our adult population owned their own home, that was good. That kept people happy. That kept them voting for you because people like house prices going up if you own a house. But now we're in a situation where 65% of our adult population own a house. So there's now a very vocal minority who are saying, we actually don't like the fact that houses are becoming ever more unaffordable. But fundamentally, this is a simple issue of supply and demand. There are simply not enough houses in New Zealand for the growing demand. And this has been a problem 30 years in the making. And so it will be a problem 20 years in the fixing, 20 or 30 years in the fixing. But nevertheless, we said, okay, we're not just going to moan about it. What are we actually going to do about it? And so effectively what Simplicity has done is we've decided that it's really time for a new deal for investors, right? A new deal in housing, one which basically builds more houses, but also ends up being a good deal for investors as well. And this is just one of the ways that the housing solution can be fixed. We're not going to fix it ourselves, but we'll help. And that's by coming up with a private market solution driven by KiwiSaver, which works in parallel with whatever councils and the government want to do and creates different options and helps increase house supply. And so what we've started doing is three things. We're building homes for long-term renting, creating a new class of accommodation in New Zealand, which is very familiar overseas, which is the ability to rent for the very long term and with a high degree of security, providing lower cost first home mortgages. I think ours are the lowest in the market and have been for the longest time. And then also funding a lot more community housing provided by community housing providers. So what we've started doing is we've actually, in the first 3 years, we've basically got about 1,500 homes underway. We've built 159 and they're now being rented by our subsidiary Simplicity Living. We have another 901 which are in build or in development, for which we've secured the land and are about to start building. I think we'll have 345 in build by the end of this year. We've also loaned our first 300 first home mortgages and really been testing our system over the first 3 years. And we've funded about 144 community homes via community housing. So I'll show you, I'll just go into a little bit more detail on all of those. In the build-to-rent homes, we've invested 122 million so far, and we've got about 1,060 homes there. So, as I mentioned before, a bunch that have been built and rented and very successfully. I think they were all rented within 2 weeks. 345 in construction now, all in Auckland, another 556 in development. So they're built and owned by Simplicity Living. It's vertically integrated, so we do everything. We buy the land, we develop it, we build, we then own, and we rent and we manage. And so that basically removes the phyllo pastry of fees and complexity that comes in the typical build-to-rent scenario in New Zealand. We have the ability to, and the money to be able to, vertically control everything there. We build the homes for 100 years plus, twice the building code, and I'll go through that in just a second, but we fully intend to own these things for 100 years, so we build them to last. If you were going to build your home and knew that it was the only one that you could own for the next 100 years, you'd build it really well. We do very long-term rents. About a quarter of our tenants at the moment are on 10-year inflation-adjusted rents. That means the rents don't go up more than their benefits in theory. And our investors get a really good return via rents, the capital appreciation of the properties, and development profits. And just making some very conservative assumptions there, our 10-year return profile, we call it the internal rate of return in our business, for investors should be somewhere between 10 and 12%. And given that people always pay their rent, and that's highly reliable and secure return, that is a very good risk-adjusted return. That is why we do this. That's the deal for the investors. We are building at about 35% below normal market costs, and we'll take you through that. Happy to answer questions. But basically, you can see a development on the right there. This is one that is currently halfway through completion in Mount Albert. It's our fourth development. That will be from first time we step on site until we have it ready for renting. It is 1 year. It takes us 1 year to build this 51 unit, and that's what we call a 3-story walk-up. You'll see the materials are brick and concrete and anodized aluminium windows and a tin roof, and that's it. Zero maintenance on the outside, very strong, very quiet, very warm, very high thermal rating, very high acoustic rating. We even stick a concrete pad on top there. It keeps the apartments quieter and warmer, and also allows us to replace the roof in 50 years' time without having to move tenants out. Here are three developments. The top right-hand one, Mount Albert. We've also announced in the bottom right-hand side there about 320 homes going into Epsom on the old Epsom racecourse. We've secured the land. We're in consenting process for that now. If that goes well, we should be building that by the end of next year. And then on the left-hand side is one in Mount Wellington. That's 297 homes. That has now begun construction. We're doing site clearance now. We expect to have that finished within about 2 years. The layout of our homes is very traditional, except it's very understood. Except that I would say that we build them at the moment about 16% larger than the average apartment for rent, and we just agreed to increase that again by another 8%. So our apartments will be about 25% larger than the average apartment for rent, and that's because we want people to live there very happily for a very long time, and having secure, happy tenants, nothing substitutes for having more space. We are able to build these at about $550,000 per 2-bedroom unit. That includes land and everything. So they are, and we build them using an on-site manufacturing process, which is it's very low tech, but it's a ruthless efficiency in terms of how we build them. That would be a typical 3-bedroom home there. Just to show you some pictures, and just to sort of make some noticeable things there, you'll see on the right-hand side, we build our ceilings 2.7 metres high, not 2.4. Once again, that's above code. It gives a lot more graciousness. You'll see a window at the end there, doors. When we first started building, it was actually a company called NZ Living, owned by Shane and Anna Brearley. They have built 900 homes for Kaingora, the Kiwi Build program, largest Kiwi Build program builders in the country. They then decided that they wanted to do a big give back, so they effectively gifted the IP and staff and the company to Simplicity, and they are going to be running it for a long time pro bono. And basically their build capacity and our money allows this to happen very efficiently. But just drawing attention to that window, when Shane and Anna built their first project, they will use 17 different windows. Now we use 4 different windows. That just shows you an example of the production methodology there. You'll see in the bathroom there, There are full length tiles there as well. The shower box is 900 wide, not 750. Once again, just all more gracious because people are happy to live there. On the left-hand side, you'll see the deck there. As you can see, most decks, if you built them to sell, would have a small table with 2 seats, so it looks good, nice bit of bling. These ones you can actually have a proper dinner party on, actually have a proper dining table, so you have room. Once again, just the graciousness of living there. Here is a bathroom, and as you can see, most bathrooms are pretty standard, but you'll see on the floor there, luxury vinyl, looks really good, warm to the touch, and then full-length tiles on the walls. These are the little things that you wouldn't do if you were building this to sell or for it to last 50 years, which is the crazy situation of our building code here, but you absolutely do if you want to own them forever. The second thing is in first home loans. I mentioned actually we have 278 mortgages. We've actually made over 300, but we encourage our members to repay them early so that we can relend the money, and they have lent about $142 million. These are all over the country. We lend, the average loan is about 65% loan to value ratio. That is first home loans only. We haven't had a single default in 3 years. I think we've had one missed payment in 3 years. Current floating rate is 6.4%, which is below all of the bank, as far as I can tell. Maybe there's a special deal one bank's got, but it's well below their floating rates and well below their fixed rates typically. And we encourage floating rates because we really do want people to pay off their home faster. The other thing we do is in community housing. We've been working with community finance to create a funding conduit for community housing providers, which means that from our point of view as an investor, we're basically buying a bond which looks and feels like any other bond, any other fixed interest investment. That allows us to buy lots of them without having to go through the bespoke problems of a deal which is specific to an area. We just buy the bond. Those bonds typically pay 1% over the 90-day bank bill rate, which is basically means what we would get by sticking in the bank. So it's a really good deal for investors. It's about 6.5% at the moment. The average loan to value ratio, this is, we're basically providing these bonds which then provide mortgage funding to community housing providers. So we've done 40 million in the first 2 years. We would like to stick a 0 on the end of that and do a lot more of that lending. Community finance have found a way to, as it were, standardise and productionise lending, because we know there's a lot of community housing providers out there who can and will and want to build homes but are struggling to get finance. So we've kicked off with the first 144. We have some very big ambitions there. So we've made a good start in terms of doing this in these 3 areas, which are the lanes that we'll stick in, but we have really big ambitions. So our goal, and this goal will require a lot of money and a lot of execution, but we're confident that over the next 10 to 15 years we have the capacity to do this, that if we get enough members in our KiwiSaver, if we get enough investors, that we will be able to build and rent 10,000 homes across the country with Simplicity Living, provide 10,000 first home mortgages and fund another 5,000 community homes. So basically the goal is 25,000 homes in the next 10 to 15 years. As I said, we've made a good start. We've got about 1,500 of those underway. And we're also, and this is really critical, aiming for higher long-term returns than investors would get in something like term deposits. This is not a term deposit. It's not the equivalent. It's a different investment. It's a managed investment fund. But we think that if we can get returns, and we think we will, above term deposits over the long term, then it'll be a great investment for members as well. And that means that we can recycle some of the money which is going into other form of income investments into actually building homes. The reason that why we draw that parallel is that if you think about in funding homes and funding mortgages, rent and mortgage is the first bill you pay, or another way of putting it, it's the last bill you won't pay. So it's highly secure cash flow. And so if we have an investment vehicle which benefits from that cash flows, should be a good investment too.
Perfect, you're out, and excellent. I'm guessing we're handing over to David now. I'm going to spotlight you, David.
Oh yeah, there we go. Thank you. Two devices. Thanks for the opportunity. Good, thanks, Sam. Good presentation. I was hoping you'd cover off the problem because I didn't include much of it at all. I'm going to discuss affordable housing and really the thesis that it is urban infrastructure, and that is we need it. We all know why we need it, but I'm going to take that a level further. A little bit about Watson Group. We're a residential and commercial property investment development company in New Zealand. As Brad mentioned, we're family owned. We do consider ourselves to be a lifestyle company because we develop spaces for people to live in, really for people to live their best life. That's what we focus on, the human. People spend more than 90% of their time in a home. So undoubtedly, this is important to focus on the human as much as it is the building. And whilst we don't necessarily specialise in developing affordable housing, we do specialise in creating quality and efficient places, leveraging inspiration from global cities. And we think that affordable housing, really the solutions for affordable housing, the crux of it is in design. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So the structure of this presentation is really about making the case, like I said, and please Sam cover the problem because it's pretty clear, but most of you on the call will know there is a clear problem. I'll talk about some government challenges and then the solutions and design, as I mentioned. So really making the case that affordable housing is urban infrastructure. We do roads, rail and hospitals really well, parks and schools. And we do have Aotearoa, of course, doing some social housing and no comment on the cost of that. It can be quite high and it is very difficult, but we are doing it. And that's great to see some of that social housing. But affordable housing is underdone in New Zealand. I really believe it is. And there's a definition of affordable housing. I put it here as less than market. So I'm not saying affordable housing is social housing, just to set the context, and it's not built to rent. It's a less than market rate, and it's also affordable over time, accounting for changes in the long run, market dynamic changes. That is key. And the reality is that fast-growing cities such as Wellington, Auckland, and others around in New Zealand do create substandard housing. It's just a fact. They need investment in the long term. And what we do see and have seen, and the reason why this is a continual problem, and Sam spoke about the long-term underinvestment, is there's the underinvestment in the demand-supply function of the housing. That's absolutely true. That's the capital component. And just to take that a step further, there's also the underinvestment in the assets themselves, because these things you don't just build once. People live in them, people use them, and they need love, care, and attention ongoing. The photo on the right is one from Auckland. The one on the left is from Los Angeles. I didn't want to take photos of children in New Zealand, but you can see the kids there. They don't have anywhere to play. This is not a conducive environment, and this is pretty typical of a lot of the so-called affordable houses we have in New Zealand. The previous ones, right? They don't have places for children to really live their best lives, and that's part of the problem, and it feeds into a lot of the social issues that we see. But of course, investment in the long term needs economic rationality. It needs to be commercial. As Sam said, the fact is the rent eats first. That's absolutely true. Families spend money on rent and then they spend it on transport. There's a photo of a nice traffic jam coming in through the Naranga Gorge. And if you look at rent plus transport, that's your total cost, right? And then everything else disposable, that's if you've got a tough week, that has to be cut. And that's just the reality of it for a lot of families in New Zealand. I think roughly 10%, Ministry of Social Development believes. So what we see is actually dentists get skipped or healthy food gets changed. And these are part of continual factors that contribute to these poor health outcomes and social outcomes we do see. So I do believe that affordable housing is crucial because, as Sam said, and I'll reiterate, the rent eats first every time. But it's a worthwhile endeavour. Here's a photo of South Africa. You can see, you've probably seen these sorts of photos before, but a clear difference between classes. And I'm not saying, this is New Zealand by any means, but it's a pretty scary photo when you look at what not blending communities does, and leads to not only inequality in the way of living and housing, but also inequality in terms of opportunities. One child on one side of the road will never make friends with a child on the other side of the road. And really, affordable housing is urban infrastructure, and it is part of the fabric that pulls our societies together. It brings households and communities together, and it is kind of that multi-purpose weave that holds the mixed income together, because people learn from each other in different parts of society. We need to have affordable housing within communities, and it has to be blended. It's not something we do and we keep isolated. So it is part of the community. Of course, though, housing is one part, and I do believe leisure is the opposable thumb, because we need to be able to bring places for children to play. They have to do wholesome activities. They have to feel safe, be safe. There are a lot of key growth areas we work on, obviously, all the time. tech, healthcare, and the government focuses on these. But we need to also consider leisure, particularly for our children. As my mother always said, the idle hands do the devil's work. It's absolutely true. And a lot of these kids, you just got to drive around some of the old 1970s, 1980s social housing places. A lot of these children, they're making it up. And you can't blame them for some of the poor social outcomes because really they're not in environments which are conducive to learning and growing. And that's part of the problem. But of course, it wouldn't be a presentation without a quick comment on the government. Not picking sides, the two, Chris is having a debate there. There are a lot of challenges with, of course, government and policies, but I'll just touch on one of them, and it's really that this notion that programs and ideas are implemented top-down. The national ideas emphasize scale. That's great, it's national. Scale implies standardization. Standardization de-emphasizes local touch, and touch is really the customization. We're making that local because there's different people live in different areas with different values. And whilst we have great national policies, it's about the execution. And anyone who's ever tried to start a business or do anything will know it's all about the execution. Touch requires localized counterparties. That's the third party. That's the entrepreneur, the local person delivering. And counterparties need to be experts across the whole value chain of development because it's complex. And particularly for affordable housing, when you retain it, it's about the total cost of ownership. But of course, they need to put purpose before profit, but also still be economically rational. It is a commercial investment. You have to provide return to investors. You have to pay your bills, and it has to be economically viable. That is a fact. And touch means a human focus. We talked about that earlier. Right product, right place for the right people in the right way. Talking a little bit more on the last slide on the government, but realistically, as you know, the government is a factory. It produces two products: law and money. You know, you do this, or law, you could put policies under that. Do this, do that, or some money here, I'll pay you for this. But the reality is, the government needs partners to deliver. For all its challenges, PPPs or public-private partnerships or impact bonds have been good. They are a good solution. They've worked really well in prisons in New Zealand, it seems, and reducing recidivism through programs. But that being said, it's really about bringing in these counterparties or these entrepreneurs. And what we're seeing is they are actually doing the work of the government faster, it seems, at the moment. That's just a personal observation. But a lot of people are sort of saying, well, we can build faster, we can build better. And we're seeing it happen across the board. There are many examples. Because the reality is, whilst the government can create law and create money, law and money is not impact. Money plus law is not equal impact. Money plus law plus a delivery partner who's local, that is what equals impact. So the reality is we do need these entrepreneurs. I will make a case for social progressive housing. Maslow said it, that shelter is a fundamental need. But really taking that a step further, shelter has to, in today's context, be safe and affordable and well designed because we've moved on really. And what we've seen, if you look back through history, is really a situation where change is driven by laws, lawsuits, insurance, and unfortunately less change is driven by customer behaviour as much as you'd want it. But what we're seeing is now with the number of standards, people are pushing forward. A lot of entrepreneurs or mission-oriented organisations are developing beyond the building code, and that's great because the building code, really is the bare minimum, and we should be pushing beyond that because we need to future-proof what we build, because there's a lot more change coming, no doubt. Realistically, affordable housing is a constant pursuit. We can never just have one period of 2 decades where we'll solve the problem, because the reality is there's a lot weighing on top of it, and there's a lot having to balance it. Market dynamics, global economy, recessions, all sorts of different things. But we must concern ourselves only with today, because these obstacles can be overcome, and we must only focus on what we can control at this point in time. It really does never stop. So I think part of the solution is really in design, because as I started the presentation, I showed the picture of the kids playing in the clothesline. I think we need to get the ugly bits right. We're really good in New Zealand at designing beautiful buildings. Of course, I'm biased. We get the exterior envelope looking great, but design is, of course, that design is focused on the aesthetic and that physical form. But really, affordable housing and having these products is about the implementation and the process. What does it look like over 20 years, and how how is it operationally done? Do you really have enough capacity for any sorts of changes in recycling methodologies, rubbish, heating and cooling? And as you can see on these example photos, people are making the best with what they've got, putting pot plants on top of HVAC and hanging washing out the windows. Looking at that in reality, over the value chain, there's, of course, buy the site, design a building and build it. That's all CapEx. Then you've got the long run, 100 years, 20 years, whatever it might be. The reality is there's a lot of costs that go in there, and you can solve a lot of that or create efficiency in that by thinking about it up front, thinking about when you're buying the site, the location, thinking about when you're designing it, and making sure that you look at the total cost of ownership over the useful life of the asset that's future-proof, and you get all the ugly stuff, that non-sexy stuff looking great up front. Where do people put their bikes? Where do people put their recycling? What if they get something new or a parcel delivered? All these things are really important to focus on. They're not the sexy part, but the reality is they make it much more cost efficient to operate for the long term. And that's truly beneficial. Really, it's about delayed gratification, driving past in 20 years and seeing the building and still being proud of it. But look, in closing, because I'm trying to race through, I've missed a lot. This is absolutely just touching the surface. It's a complex issue, and it's one which requires considerable investment. I think the barriers to entry are intellectual and financial. Intellectual in that they require vision, confidence, credibility. They do require a deep level of thinking. It's not building a few townhouses, flipping them and walking off. There is a lot more to it. And I don't think it's a single deal. It's a business model. It's an enduring business model. It needs scale and it must be commercially viable. And I think it needs the right partnerships in place. Thirdly, affordable housing is always needed. I think it will never not be needed, and it will always need innovators, as we saw in some of those previous timelines. Good enough today is substandard tomorrow, and I think there always will be an undersupply. It's just simple statistics. Local delivery partners deliver to locals. I think that's fundamentally important because every community is different, and there are a lot of passionate communities out there. And finally, better housing, I think we can all agree, is a worthwhile and morally just endeavour. Doing the right thing to the right people in the right way. It creates better societies for us. I mean, we live in multi-income, sort of diverse societies. We all grow and be better together. And that would be the final thing I'd comment. It's about creating a great lifestyle. But if you want to keep talking about it, I think, and thank you for the opportunity, Freda, for being here. Feel free to take a screenshot of my details on screen and flip me an email. But I'll hand back to Freda now. Thank you.
Brilliant, amazing. Thank you both so much. And I appreciate that was quite condensed. Maybe I overemphasized the Q&A section. So what that means is now the pressure's really on the listeners to lean into this conversation. There were a lot of brilliant sound bites. I liked your phyllo pastry reference, Sam, and focusing on the ugly bits, David, which I think actually when we unpick that, it is really essential. Anyone who's lived as a renter in New Zealand knows what you mean. So we've got a pretty record-breaking number of people on this call today. Please start to either raise a hand or post a question into the chat, and we'll fill up the next 30 minutes effortlessly, I think. Anthony Pelosi, over to you, Anthony.
Kia ora. Thank you both for inspiring presentations and important conversation for all New Zealanders, I think. My question at this stage, I guess, is mainly towards Sam in regards to building on the great work that you're doing and the thinking behind that work and the sort of challenging the status quo. I'm keen to hear your thoughts on a low carbon version of what you're doing and how that might impact some of the stuff that you're proposing.
Sure. So it's a good question, Anthony. So, because a lot of people will say, oh, you're building with concrete and brick, concrete, ipso facto, bad for carbon. I guess there's a couple of, just about short-term and long-term here. Well, really sorry, there are three things to consider here. The first is whether that's actually true. And the science is very imperfect here in the sense that we have yet to find a study which actually takes the total carbon footprint of a traditional New Zealand, what we call a stick-built house versus a concrete-built house, because yes, wood instinctively sounds like a great store of carbon and lower impact, and the manufacture of concrete does burn a lot of carbon. But by the time you mill it, transport it, wrap it in insulation, make sure it has the fire, thermal and acoustical protection that concrete naturally provides, and do a full audit, including a whole of life audit in terms of, how much longer concrete lasts and so on and so forth. So I guess there's a question mark. There's an instinctive feel that wood must be better, but we have a question mark about whether that is actually the case. And the problem is the science is uncertain here. At this stage, we know that concrete emits a lot of carbon, and we know that trees absorb it. But after that, there's an awful lot that goes into before you build, own, and operate a home over the long term. And there's things about the thermal efficiency of our homes. Half of our homes, the 900 that have been built by NZ Living, have never had the heater turned on. We know that because it's still covered in plastic. So they're incredibly thermally efficient, which means you're burning less fossil fuels to power and so on. That'd be the first part, and we're going to try our hardest to get that properly audited, because we're open-minded to using other building technologies as well. The second one is what we're doing in the short term, because we are building with concrete, and it's all very well having these theories, but what in practice do you do? Well, obviously we buy low E crete, and we're prepared to pay the premium to do that as well. So we will buy the most environmentally efficient concrete in the market, or the lowest carbon. So we do that as a matter of course. We don't mind spending a little bit more, because if you own these things for 100 years, you can amortize that over a long period of time. Makes no difference, or very small difference, to the economics over the long term. The second thing is we're doing something very practical. 1/3 of the footprint of all of our developments is basically green. So we plant about 30 to 60 native trees per apartment. And then in the rent, we take every week, we plant a native tree for every apartment we rent. So at the moment, we're planting 159 a week. When we're doing 10,000 trees a week, and we just intend to do that in perpetuity. That's via Trees That Count. It's just all over the country. It just helps, beautify the country and act somewhat as a carbon sink. There's no massive science behind this. We know that Simplicity as an organisation plants a lot of native trees. We've already planted over 150,000 of them, and absorbed, in theory, 35,000 tonnes of concrete. But that's over the life. Of carbon. So over the life cycle of the forest, it's a long time, right? So that's what we practically do. Long term, the issue there is well, first of all, is concrete as bad as people think? There's some very interesting studies coming out of Sweden in particular right now, which shows its ability to actually absorb carbon over a period of time. But obviously, we've massively focused on the long-term solutions, and that really relies on two things. First of all, is ever low emission concrete. There's some very interesting technologies coming through right now, which are seeking to substitute some of the concrete for, or substitute doing them with things called pozzolans from volcanic ash and so on. There's an interesting New Zealand company doing that right now called Neocrete. The problem there is getting production, because we need, to give you an example, the site we're building in Mount Wellington right now will have 2 concrete pours a day for 300 days. So, you just need a lot of concrete, right? So, and you need to be able to reliably supply it. So maybe we can act as a demand agent for that, which will spur supply. But at the end of the day, that's a long term, but our heart's in the right place there. And then the second one is waste minimisation, right? One of the interesting things is we can see in terms of jumbo bins going off our site versus similar or sites right next door that are using different technologies, the more traditional technologies. We have about a quarter of the jumbo bins going off. So we're producing about 75% less waste. That is hugely important in terms of the overall carbon contribution you're making. So, and our building mechanism, one of the reasons is we can build for about 2,500 a square metre, which is, between 30 and 40% lower than the market, is because we run it as a very efficient on-site manufacturing. So we basically don't even consider it construction, we call it production. And so we're constantly trying to find small improvements in efficiencies, which is built up over several decades, which is what Anna and Shane have done, means that we actually have a construction methodology which builds houses twice as fast, about twice as fast as normal. They last twice as long, and they're cheaper. So, they say in construction you can't get faster, better, and cheaper. Yeah, you really can. We're doing it. And by the way, all of the IP is all available for free. We would love 5 or 6 construction companies to be doing what we're doing, so that we just increase the supply of housing, because that's the root cause of the problem. Sorry, mate, that was a very, very long answer, but it's a very complex issue there. But you know, we totally acknowledge the issue, and we'll do our best.
I'd love to talk more offline about this in a constructive way, because I have some things that may help.
Yeah, sure. So for anyone who wants to have a chat, just at sam.stubbs@simplicity.kiwi, or my mobile is 021 491 547. And don't be shy. That's what I'm here for.
Cool,
I'm going to pass everyone's your contact details to everyone at the end. And I just wanted to ask David, did you want to add anything to that, or we can just jump through the questions that was directed at Sam? But welcome your thoughts.
I think it's a good point. I think I'd probably just reiterate the point around science for carbon. It's not captured. The data is simply not captured, so we can't be sure either way, end to end in the value chain for production of wood or concrete. So it is hard to really speak to facts there. But there are a lot of companies who are looking at capturing that by logging, or effectively putting RFID tags on trees from the day they're planted right through the piece of timber going up in a house. So we'll hopefully in another 10 years we'll see some of that data come through.
I would make one comment here that David, you're absolutely right. We live in a crazy situation at the moment. If we spend money on planting pine forests, we get carbon credits for it. If we spend money on planting native trees, it's basically no carbon credits. It's not worth doing it. There is something just insanely stupid about that, and yet we don't seem to be able to do anything about it. But it doesn't matter. We're just going to carry on planting heaps of native trees anyway. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to sort of try and be bipartisan with the raised hands versus the chat. So, Lucy Groenhart, would you like to ask your question, please? Thank you.
Kia ora, thanks. So just for disclosure, I'm from the Ministry for the Environment. So putting aside the carbon credit issue, I was keen to hear from either or both of you about what would the one thing government could do, in your view, that central government, to increase the supply of affordable housing.
Dave, you want to start off with that?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, it's planning and freeing up land. Sam mentioned it's a demand and supply issue. It really is. It's difficult to get the land and to get the right zoning, and there are a lot of blockers, I suppose, right or wrong, that government has in place for that. That's mine. I think it's a zoning issue.
So Lucy, I have a slightly more complex, and as you can see, I don't sort of pull back on my opinions on these things. I think the government can do some things, but I'll give you an example. So we basically do infill housing. So we have a checkbook to buy land. Land to us is not the issue. There's heaps of land in New Zealand. It's the money and the capacity to build on it that's the issue, right? So we have heaps of land, government has, and we've been involved in 7 projects now. 3 of them we basically bought from the government, but the last 3 we've bought in the private market, because the net cost, if you build efficiently, the cost of land, even if you're paying private market prices, is only about 15% of the total cost of the project. So everyone talks about land as being the issue. Land is not the issue. Money and construction capacity is the issue. If there was one thing government could do, and look, I'm sorry, I don't mean this to be just in the interest of it's just get out of our way, in the sense that if you think about our ability to build, it takes us a year from the time we get on site to build a development. And if it's a 300 home, it's 2 years. The process of getting to that point will be 1 to 2 years. So it takes us as long to get permission to build as it does to actually build and rent the whole thing. There is something wrong about that, because that time is just cost. It's and I understand the tribulations government has in this, because government are incredibly accountable for their decisions. So there's a lot of consultation, there's a lot of opinions, and there's a lot of sensitivity about blowback. And so maybe it's a pipe dream that we could, speed up the consenting process. But at the end of the day, to get to a resource consent requires a tremendous amount of hui, and before we can do the doing, right? So that would be my one thing. It would be try and find a way to fast track the consenting process.
Thank you. really useful answers. I'm just going to keep rolling through the questions. Lawrence Hager asks, what role do rental rights and rent control play in the supply of housing to rent? What rights does Simplicity give its renters over and above those stipulated in law?
So the answer to that is that there is nothing that we codify other than we will write contracts which have inflation adjusted rents, and the law has clearly swung back under the previous government towards renters. Look, can I just take this back to a more fundamental principle? The issue with renting apartments is the rental market is like the insurance market in New Zealand. It's fundamentally based on mistrust. That is that you get a renter who thinks this person's ripping me off, and so I'm not going to, I'm going to get away with as much as I can, and the landlord thinking all renters are abusive of the property, and so there's just a huge amount of mistrust there. It's like with an insurance policy, the insurance company has to pay the shareholder or pay the policy, so you have hugely complex contracts because people don't trust each other. So we're going to be really naive and really dumb and really stupid in this, and we're going to go and say, you know what, we trust you. Yes, there's a legal contract that we have to have with you, and you have your rights, and they will change according to the law of the time, as will ours. But fundamentally, we want you to be in these apartments because we own them forever and rent them forever. We want you to be in there and happy for the rest of your lives if you want to. So we need to trust each other. What does that mean? That means that we do not shortchange the maintenance. It means that we do not build the minimum scale and minimum spec apartment we can do. Here is something which is hopefully beautiful, robust, really pleasant to live in, and it is at a price which you consider fair. We both consider fair to our investors and fair to you. And you know what? As sometimes your trust gets abused, sometimes people, take the mickey out of you. But generally, if most people trust each other in a rental relationship, that will make for a very happy relationship. And so you just have to take it on the chin. But right now, what the whole industry protects itself against the 1 or 2% of people, I don't know, maybe it's 5% of people who abuse the trust. And that's both renters and landlords, right? So if what I'm really hoping for is that, and by the way, we're branding everything as Simplicity. We're putting our names all over it because I want the brand risk of a pleasant experience, of an unpleasant experience. I want it to be bad for our brand if we give an unpleasant experience. I also want people to say nice things if we give a pleasant experience, right? So, sorry, yes, I'm not talking about the specifics of the law right now, but yes, we do inflation-adjusted rents. Yes, we provide they're genuinely affordable. Yes, they're very high quality, and we think that will earn people's trust, and there'll be good tenants accordingly. So far, it's worked beautifully, but we've only just started.
Wonderful answer. And I love that you've both got a very human-centered philosophy, and that I have to jump in and say, Sam, you reminded me of a beautiful quote by Laird Sue, that if the government doesn't trust the people, they'll be untrustworthy. So I think that's a really fundamental kind of Matauranga Māori principle right there.
Absolutely.
So,
and trust you earn, right? You don't get given it and you don't buy it, you've got to earn it. So we're in the process of earning our tenants' trust, and they will reward it. They will be wonderful. If you treat someone like an adult, they'll act like an adult,
Exactly. And just rewinding back to the first question in the chat, Simon Scott has just asked, I think this is aimed at you, Sam, if the model were to be successful in increasing supply and reducing pressure on rents and rental yields, won't this undermine the viability of new projects, thereby discouraging development or undermine the profitability of investments already made?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So if we have more supply, which would help cap out rents and maybe cap out house price increases, will that basically mean there's even less houses being supplied? Well, it's a really good question. Look, I would say this, unfortunately, we don't have the time for me to give you a more comprehensive answer, but we firmly believe that actually we've got ourselves into this problem because we've been protecting the profitability of small-scale bespoke developments all over the country and developers, not intentionally protecting them, but we have a crazy system where we have too few houses that are too expensive. So why do you want to repeat that? Why do you want to carry on with the same craziness that's got us into this trouble in the first place? You have to completely reset it by actually increasing a lot of supply. And what we actually think is by doing that, funnily enough, by actually making property investment more reliable and less speculative, which it is in the development phase right now, it's a hell of a punt when a property developer gets out there. They've got to get the timing right, they've got to be good to the banks and so on. But if we had actually more stable returns and more stable supply, more money would come in, creating a much more virtuous circle. It's why in countries like Germany, Spain, France, Belgium, and so on, you actually have about 40% of people living in apartments, and a lot of them are owned by pension funds like KiwiSaver, and it is a long-term reliable return for the pension funds, but it's not fly-by-night speculation. It's not windfall profits if you get the market right and sell them and so on. So we have bizarrely enough too much entrepreneurialism, too much entrepreneurial activity in housing in New Zealand. We need a little bit more boring institutional activity. You want boring old KiwiSaver providers like us just pumping out their houses at reliable prices. That's how you fix not preserving the mentality in the environment that encourages people to take excess risk in developing it, for which you, the purchaser or the renter, have to pay. You know, this system doesn't work, and it doesn't give us what we need as a society, which is the most basic of human rights, an affordable home, which is the ultimate fence at the top of the cliff for all the other social problems that come from not having, as Dave talked about, not having the human experience of living in a warm, dry home. So, you know, what we're doing here is showing the example of how it can be done. We hope other KiwiSaver providers will follow us, other developers will build according to our system. You know, we're building homes now, 2-bedroom apartments, turnkey for $550,000. Yeah, like no one in the country is doing that, and yet they're made out of brick and they're warm and they're dry. So it's showing it is actually possible. Yeah, sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now on my.
No. I really wish I booked 2 hours. We're learning a lot. I just wanted to quickly say to Dave, do you want to add anything? I loved your leisure being the opposable thumb of housing. I actually think there's so much in that with my psych sort of outdoor background. So did you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I think Sam did a good job summarising that. But it is important to look at the person who lives in this house, because we talk about warm and dry. I think that's the bare minimum. Of course, it should be warm and dry. We need to look at how this person lives realistically, and I'll come back to the design. Actually, you know, we look at when someone walks into a home, where are they covered when they open the door? You know, can they hold their washing and open the door and get in comfortably? Look at these micro movements, because I think it's all of those little things, all those little details on how people live is what really leads to having a good life. Two people approaching a door, the door gets clunky or something. There's all sorts of tricky things, and I think that's a lot where it is. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the opposable thumb being leisure. People have to enjoy where they live. They have to be inspired by where they live. A lot of people on this call, you know, we probably live in nice places. I know I like where I live. I rent myself, and I like where I live. And I think the home is a good place for your muse, so you're happy. And that's why I put leisure as being the opposable thumb and bringing us all together.
Thank you. Just going to read a comment in the chat. Axel Beck from the Waikato Housing Initiative has just said, I agree with you, Sam, that zoned land is not the issue. Infrastructure enabled land, Three Waters in particular, is the real issue. Councils can't afford to fund it, and it's a big hurdle for developers. Up front, that was just a comment. And then Matthew Cutler-Welsh from the Green Building Council has said, asked a question for Sam. How can councils and central government distinguish between developers who should be fast-tracked and those who perhaps need more constraints?
Yeah, it's a good question. And of course, you know, we're going to ask for special treatment like every developer does, right? But in our case, because we're a charity and a non-profit and KiwiSaver and all that sort of thing, and I absolutely understand the frustration that you get, because the vast majority of developers that come in are there to make a profit, and God bless them, you know, that's what, you know, the developers should be allowed to do. So distinguishing between the ones that get fast track or not is absolutely difficult. I would say this, though, is that if you look into the underlying motivation of the organisation, so in that case, so for example, and maybe I'm stepping into politically sensitive water here, right? But if you're a community housing provider and you're asking for resource consent, you can kind of work out that they're probably, you know, heart's in the right place. They may make some mistakes here, but maybe, you know, you need to approach that as being what we're trying to achieve is something. If it's someone like us, a non-profit provider, maybe that's a little bit different than someone who in the local community, is a known builder of sub-spec, expensive, quick flick houses, And I think actually the council and consenting officials are actually really smart, and they're actually able to work out and differentiate it. It's that it's not codified that they're allowed to exercise their discretion, maybe as much as it should be. But either way, it's difficult. I'd come back to that infrastructure question you made before, because here's the insane thing about greenfields developments. I know I'm just massively opposed to them for a couple of reasons. One is, in big cities, people forget that our population in New Zealand is forecast to start shrinking after about 2080. So in Auckland, the fourth largest city in the world by land area at the moment, with, and I think we rank about 200th in terms of population. So a massive city, we're already thinking, it's a land, we're going to expand. But if you look at Tokyo and Seoul, two of the cities which actually have shrinking populations now, there aren't many examples of them, but it turns out that those greenfield sites, with all that new infrastructure, which you've had to pay for, brand new infrastructure, and therefore have to fund the maintenance of, that suddenly becomes way more difficult because people retreat to the centre. The first demographic, real live examples we have of cities shrinking are retreats to the centre. Now, who knows whether that will last, but what I know is that when we build a big development in Mount Wellington or Mount Albert or Onehunga, and we are paying the development, charges there, that the cost of upgrading that infrastructure, which is already under our seat, is way better, way cheaper than building a whole new set of infrastructure somewhere else, and the existing stuff we're on needs to be maintained as well. So it's like it's a crazy national resource allocation if we think that building on new grounds, in many cases good agricultural land, is actually a sensible use of our resources. It's not. We need to go up, not out. Now, maybe a little bit of both.
We've hit 12, so we may just see people dropping off the call. However, for those who are still on, I'm just going to assume there's still some interest and some time availability to squeeze in some last questions from those patiently waiting. So Sean Woodward and Peter Cochrane, maybe we could squeeze your questions in, and also speakers, if you've got a couple more minutes. I should have checked with you first. Excellent. Sean Woodward.
Question to both of you around the supply, current supply. What percentage do you think of the market is this affordable long-term rental that you're providing? And do you have an idea of an ideal percentage of the supply that, what's the size of the market for what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I'd be guessing at the statistic, to be honest, Sean, but I think long term it should represent 10%, which is roughly the number of people that live in overcrowded homes.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Ours is a little higher than that. Here are the numbers that we sort of anchor ourselves on. In the OECD, 42% of people live in apartments. In New Zealand, it's about 3%. Of those 42, it's hard to get an accurate number, but a rule of thumb is about half of those are what we call institutionally owned by pension funds. And so that means that about 20% of the OECD populations are living in a home and renting it, owned by someone like a KiwiSaver fund. Now, I'm going to always assume with these things that it's way too high, so let's halve that. And so we get back to what Sean's talking about is about, 10%. And that we just want to do this as another housing option. It takes pressure off the social housing rolls for those who can afford to pay the rent. And it's also another option, for example, for people who sell their own home, can't afford to go into a Ryman, but need a stable long-term place to rent. One of my dreams is to be able to say, in fact, we're doing this. We have tearful moments around here all the time on this, where you say to someone, an elderly couple, and you say, you're safe. This is your home now. You can be here for the rest of your life. You don't own it, but you're safe. And that's what they want. They want safety. So, and security. So I think about 10%. I would agree with Dave, that 10% now, but that's still a huge number, right?
Yeah.
That's about 10 times what we're thinking of doing over the next 10 to 15 years. So there is a massive structural need for this sort of housing.
And also just to build on that, Sean, separating affordable housing from build-to-rent housing, from social housing, from private housing, that's 10%, which is affordable housing.
Yep.
But if you look overseas, high-end build-to-rent housing is a different product, and generally that trades, the rents there about 10% over market cost. So that's not part of this, which is defined as affordable housing. And also it doesn't include social housing because that's transitional housing. So this is, as Sam said, affordable housing, people to have long-term security. There's lots of different people with different needs, and we need different houses for different people.
There's a cultural change, isn't there, from the home being your nest egg to it being your nest? So that move from home ownership to stability.
100%. It's about living your best life, and the home enables that.
Sean, that's such a beautiful phrase. Do you mind if I steal that?
I think I stole it from somewhere, so go for it. Yeah.
Thank you.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's when you look at the systems, and obviously the tax advantage, and you're talking about smaller developers, these mum and dads that have bought rental properties and developing it, and that focus. It's not about housing and stability. It's about capital-free, tax-free capital gains.
It is, and ironically, if you take that away, I think we will get far more houses built.
Yep.
Because the real big need for supply can only be funded by the big institutions like ourselves. You just don't have enough. It hasn't worked for the last 30 years. Although interestingly enough, the big undersupply has been government funded. So if government aren't going to do it, and I don't think that there is enough gas in the tank for them to be able to do it, institutions like ourselves are going to have to fill that gap.
You can steal my quote, Sam, and I'll pass your quote that you support removing or putting a capital gains tax on, and pass that to my sister-in-law in the media.
I do. Well, I actually think, and I know that it sounds a little bit perverse, but I do actually think putting a capital gains tax on investment properties will actually increase the supply of them, because I do understand the motivation of large scale investors right now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent conversation. Thank you, everyone. And Peter's patiently waiting. Shall I hand over, Peter?
Kia ora. Thanks for your great presentations. This question's mostly for Sam, but open to Dave as well. I work in transport engineering and transport strategy, and even with the NPSUD and MDRS land zoned to allow development in the high demand areas of our cities, is still constrained below what demand would support. I'm interested in your thoughts on making sure affordable housing isn't pushed out to places where it just is replaced by the poverty of car dependence instead. Yeah. How do you get great access by walking and biking and public transport into your developments? And also any thoughts on mixed use development?
Yeah, totally. So the first thing on transport is that's the number one priority for us, is close to transport hubs. So if you look over our 7 developments in Auckland, I should say, we have gone from the farthest away as a 10-minute walk to a train station. The latest one we just purchased, which is yet to be announced, is 30 seconds from a train station. So it is incredibly important to us that you don't need a car to live, because we just don't think, well, all things being equal, you're going to want to live in a place where you can walk to most amenities, right? That actually makes it more desirable. The economics of that do not change. It is not unaffordable to build within transport hubs. You just have to have the scale and the vertical integration to be able to do it. So, and we're just going to show that that's possible, right? By the way, which is unusual in New Zealand, but go to Berlin or Birmingham or Manchester or Paris or anywhere, and this is what people manage to achieve, right? So totally agree with that. We only build, at the moment, we're just building Auckland, we're just building the isthmus of Auckland. We are not participating in greenfield developments where there's transport poverty. That sucks. And to give you an example, we're currently developing something in Epsom. It's 300 plus apartments, and we're already talking to the local hospital about, rather than having their nurses and cleaners commuting for an hour to get to that rich part of Auckland, why don't they live within a 3-minute walk? that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? So, but you just have to have the economies of scale that we can bring to be able to make that happen. In terms of mixed use, look, I think that's a journey we're going to go down, because it inherently makes sense that you may rent for a while and then decide to buy. Maybe we can sell you that apartment, and because we built it, we could lend money on it too, because we know the quality of it, and then you get a pathway to home ownership. The issue with mixed use ownership, though, is it just takes a while, because we want to be able to maintain control of the maintenance and management of the facility, whatever it is, so that it stays of a very high quality. But, you know, all of these things are possible, Peter. Unfortunately, it took us 30 years to get into this hole. It's going to take us at least 30 years to get out of it, but, you know, at least we've made a start. But in principle, yeah, I like the idea. I personally like the idea of rent an apartment with simplicity. You know what it is. You decide to buy it. We say that's cool. We do it at a market valuation, no real estate agents involved, saving money. We'll then lend you the money via our first home program. You pay it off quickly. Hey, presto, you've owned your home. And it'll be, you know, faster and better. And that's worked well for our members as well. They've made a fair return all the way through, you know, by renting and then lending you the money.
Do you feel like you have much control or power or influence over the public network of transport? Because you can choose which site to build on, you can put end-of-trip facilities on your site, but you're still going to be reliant on what happens outside your gate.
Yeah, no, we don't have much control. I mean, look, as you know, we're a non-profit owned by a charity, so when we go in and see councils, I think some of their suspicion about our motivations is removed, which is great. So we can have a more frank conversation, but we're not so big that we can influence it. Nor I think should we. I think, you know, that's the job of the planners, and we should be capitalising and growing around the city that they envisage. Because if you listen to us, we'll still be self-serving and too self-serving. So come up with a plan. But all we look for, and this is a common bugbear I have about politics generally, is just give us a plan, please. I don't want a plan which is valid for 3 years until the government changes and then that's burnt and then there's another plan. We are investing here for 100 years. It takes us many years to develop and do these things. So please, just policy certainty is what we're looking for. And I appreciate that it's not in the powers of a lot of people to provide that. But, you know, I like the idea of a long-term Auckland transport plan. We will develop around that. We will, you know, we'll do our bit, but perish the thought that we have an awful lot of influence over that. That would be the wrong way to go about it. That's the tail wagging the dog.
And Dave,
Right,
thank you. Dave, did you want to add any thoughts there?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Okay.
All good ideas until the next election. Yeah. No, we need consistency in planning for this. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. How are we for time? Do we have time for a couple more questions, Sam and Dave?
Yeah, I'm fine for a couple more. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
All right, I'm just going to read 2 in a row. We're just going to go super size here. Kerry has said, Sam, do you have any plans to finance affordable housing projects or even progressive home ownership tenures? And Ron Vink asks, will you be looking to extend your work in community housing beyond Auckland?
So second question is absolutely. If community housing, community finance can provide us with projects outside of Auckland, we'd love to do that. Love to do it all around the country because we have members all around the country. So totally keen on that. In terms of the other, you know, progressive home ownership and affordable housing, what we decided to do is stick in our lanes, right? Because there are many, many very worthy projects that need money. The problem is so many of them are bespoke and small scale. So I do not want this to sound arrogant at all. I realize it can come across this way, but when you are managing, you know, in our case, $5.5 billion, and you have a project which comes in which is asking for 1, 3, 5 million, it is just too small. It takes too much of our bandwidth to be able to negotiate that one particular deal under those terms and conditions. So we like standardized vanilla cookie cutter approaches. That's basically how you turn the vein of financing into an artery of financing for any project. So that's happening with community finance. That's why we're sticking with that model. And we say, okay, if you, the community or affordable housing provider, can fit into their prerequisites, then we can easily supply the money at the other end there. In terms of progressive home ownerships, I mean, I get to see a lot of them, and they are all wonderful. They're really great ideas, but we simply cannot stay out of our lanes. We want to achieve a scale difference here and get a fair return for our members too. And that's one of the problems with progressive home ownership ones, is it tends to be a little bit more of a subsidy rather than an investment. But if we stick into community housing, build to rent housing, and affordable first home mortgages, we think we'll make the biggest difference there. And most importantly, good returns for our members, because unless it stacks up financially, unless our KiwiSaver members are not getting a fair return, none of this is going to work. This is just an experiment which will fail. These things, and I think that's the key to our model, is that it's commercial. It's a commercial model. It's repeatable and scalable, and it's very hard to achieve that, but we've been in a lucky enough position to be able to.
I think we'll go for one more. I've managed this a little bit over generously, Italian style webinar. We've gone way over. Harry Mills, you've got your hand raised. Do you want to jump on?
Yeah, kia ora, everyone. Thank you very much. I was just wondering, in relation to Peter's question earlier about transport and mixed use, I was thinking about mixed use in terms of mixed use development, as in integrating kind of residential and commercial activities within the same place, and was just wondering how that fits in, particularly seeing as you're building around transport hubs and towards the center of the city. How does that fit into your plan or vision for?
Yeah. Well, you'll start to see some of our announcements have some mixed use aspects of that, some small retail, specialty retailers in there. But equally also, what we're very keen on is that what we do with our developments, and some of which are quite large, 300 plus homes, is that they fully integrate into the community and they support what is already there. So, for example, rather than building a childcare centre, we would rather build close to a childcare centre so the existing operator gets more demand. So when you bring more people in, you can get more economic activity. There is no reason for us to be competing with anyone who is otherwise providing a great community service. Or rather than put in a swimming pool, which is an expensive piece of bling used by about 1 or 2% of the residents, why don't we put it close to a community swimming pool? So if you want to swim, that means there's more business for that pool. It's more viable. There's an economic infrastructure and ecosystem that develops there. And that is the curse of New Zealand urban areas, by the way. Population spread too thinly because we've all loved our standalone homes. That means community facilities never get the patronage that they deserve. You never get the people paying enough rates to keep the sewer and water lines done. Population densities. Cities work because you've got a lot of people living in a relatively small space, which means everything is affordable. That has not been the New Zealand dream. We have this romantic idea, which was formed in the 1910s and 1920s and 30s when it was affordable, right? Of the standalone home in a quarter-acre section, the half-gallon quarter-acre Pavlova paradise, as Austin Mitchell wrote about in the 1960s. But what's interesting about that, though, is look at what James Fletcher did. When James Fletcher was, and I think it was Keith Hayes, were given the order by the government in the 1930s to build the first state homes in any volume. What did they do? I think there was 5 different styles you could buy. That was it. Only 5, 1 of 5, single bay villa, double bay villa. They built them all the same, and they were, for the time, densely packed in. A quarter-acre section, creating whole towns out of these things. And you know what? In the first 1 year, they built 70,000 of them in 1 year because it was standardized, repeatable. So let's take that mentality and recognize that, you know what? A lot of New Zealanders don't want to mow the lawns. I mean, if you want to, that's great, and you should have that option. But for the new houses we build, maybe you want to live in an apartment, maybe where it's looked after. Maybe if you're elderly or disabled, you want it to be a LifeMark apartment, so you have a beautiful lift to take you up and down and a nice view and all that, But so few New Zealanders live that way right now. But I think this is one of the solutions, is to have a lot more accepting that is a great way to live, which it is in almost every other large city in the world, by the way. We are the exception here, not the norm.
David, did you want to speak to that at all? And maybe we'll start to sort of round up as well. I just want to ask you maybe what you're most excited about next year, or as a sort of a Watson Group initiative, or I don't know, a story that you've got about what you might be setting your sights on for 2024 and 2054.
Yeah, 2054. We're going to take our skills and experience and look to create an affordable project as well, affordable housing project. And really our focus, as I've said, is really about the person who lives in it. There's one thing, when you do infill housing, there's always a pool or a bus stop or something nearby. All that stuff's, pretty straightforward. There's always a good bus and EV charging and all these sorts of things. We're really going to try and focus on the types of people, the demographics that move there and why they want to move there, and lean into that. And we're excited about it. We're excited about using our kind of human-centered approach to developing something truly special, because we believe it's about people living their best lives.
Thank
I
you.
think just in closing, Fred, I'd say thank you for this good presentation to end the year. So cheers.
Thank you so much. Sam, did you have any closing comments? You've got to go.
Look, thanks, Frida. Look, we're in first gear at the moment. Next year, I want to get into second gear, and then in 3 years' time, be in fourth gear. Basically doing what we're doing, just a lot more of it. That will require a lot more people, members who invest with us and believe in what we do. So, I'll be traipsing around the country. Wherever you're from, I'll be almost certainly be in your hometown next year talking about this. So really, really look forward to meeting you personally.
Excellent. Thank you so much. You can do a grand national listening tour like Gareth Hughes did. So just again, I guess a huge thank you today. We've gone over, which I think just highlights how important and how close to people's hearts this issue is, and that thank you for lifting the conversation to a bit more of a social fabric, community level, value statement and principle-based approaches. So thank you so much. We will send slides to people, and just really grateful to end the year on the excellent conversation. Let's get more going next year. Thank you.
Merry Christmas. Ho, ho, ho.
Happy holidays. Yeah.
See you later.
Happy Christmas. Ka kite. Thank you.
Ka kite.